Most people think changing the mind requires years of effort. But sometimes the smallest physical action reveals something astonishing about how the brain actually works, and that's exactly what we're going to explore together. If simply clenching your fists for 90 seconds can measurably influence attention, memory, or emotional state, then the real question isn't whether it works, it's why. And once you understand the why, you'll never look at your own brain the same way again. So don't watch this as another life hack. Watch it as an experiment. By the end, you'll know what science has actually discovered, what is myth, what is evidence, and why understanding your own brain may be one of the most useful things you'll ever learn. Most people spend their lives believing that the brain is a mysterious machine hidden safely inside the skull, completely separate from everything else the body does. We imagine that thoughts come first, and actions follow. We think the mind gives orders, and the body simply obeys. But what if the relationship works both ways? What if the body is constantly talking back to the brain, quietly changing the way you think, feel, and remember without you ever noticing? That idea sounds strange at first because we're taught to think of the brain as the boss. Yet the more scientists study the nervous system, the more they discover that your muscles, your breathing, your posture, your heartbeat, and even the way you hold your hands are continuously sending information upward, shaping what the brain experiences. So here's a fascinating experiment. Clench your fists firmly for 90 seconds. Not painfully, just firmly enough that you can feel the muscles working. Then ask yourself a simple question. Did anything change? Perhaps nothing happened. Perhaps your attention shifted. Maybe you became more aware of your body. Maybe your thoughts felt slightly different. That tiny experiment opens the door to a much larger question, and it is far more interesting than whether a social media trick is true or false. The real question is this: how much of what we call the mind is actually influenced by the body? The first thing we should do is avoid fooling ourselves. Human beings are remarkably good at convincing themselves that something works simply because they expect it to work. If someone tells you a simple trick will make you smarter, calmer, happier, or more creative, your expectations alone can change your experience. That doesn't mean the trick is useless, but it does mean we have to separate genuine biological effects from imagination. Science becomes exciting precisely because it refuses to settle for comforting stories. It asks, what really happens? That question is much harder than it sounds. The brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, each communicating with thousands of others through electrical signals and chemical messages. Every second, unimaginable numbers of messages travel through this vast network. To believe that clenching your fists magically transforms all of that would be absurd, but to believe that the action does absolutely nothing would also ignore what neuroscience has been discovering for decades. Think about something very ordinary. Imagine you're standing on the edge of a tall building, safely behind a strong glass barrier. You know perfectly well that you're safe. Logic tells you there's no danger, that your heart beats faster, your palms become sweaty, your breathing changes, your muscles tighten. Now ask yourself an interesting question. Did your thoughts change your body, or did your body's reaction change your thoughts? The answer is both. The relationship is circular. Your brain interprets what you see, your body responds. And then your brain receives new information from the body, reinforcing the emotional experience. Instead of a one-way conversation, it's a continuous loop. Every moment, the brain is listening to the body just as much as the body is listening to the brain. This is one of the reasons posture matters. When you slouch, your muscles send different signals than when you stand upright. When you breathe rapidly, your nervous system receives different information than when you breathe slowly. When you smile, even if you weren't smiling a moment before, muscles in your face communicate with areas involved in emotion. None of these actions instantly transform your personality, but each contributes a small piece to the enormous puzzle your brain is constantly assembling. The brain doesn't simply observe the body, it uses the body's information to predict what is happening both inside and outside you. In many ways, your brain behaves less like a dictator giving commands and more like a detective collecting clues. Now let's return to the fists. Why would squeezing them matter at all? Muscles require effort. The moment you tighten them, sensory receptors begin reporting changes in pressure, tension, and position. Those signals travel through nerves into the spinal cord and eventually reach regions of the brain responsible for movement, sensation, attention, and coordination. The action itself isn't magical. It's communication. Your nervous system suddenly receives a burst of information that wasn't there a moment before. That alone can shift attention away from wandering thoughts and toward immediate physical awareness. Have you ever noticed that when you're carrying something heavy, you're much less likely to drift into daydreaming? Your brain becomes anchored in the present because the body is demanding attention. Clenching your fists works on the same principle, though on a much smaller scale. Some researchers have explored another fascinating possibility. Because each side of the brain primarily controls the opposite side of the body, actions involving one hand may influence patterns of activity between the two hemispheres. A few experiments have suggested that clenching one fist before certain tasks might slightly affect memory retrieval or memory formation. These findings attracted enormous public attention because they sounded almost unbelievable. But here's where careful thinking becomes essential. The studies were small, the effects modest, and later research has produced mixed results. That doesn't mean the original work was fraudulent. It simply means science is still investigating. Real science rarely says we have the final answer. Instead, it says, this is interesting. Let's test it again. That attitude is far more valuable than certainty because it keeps us moving closer to the truth instead of becoming trapped by attractive myths. There is another reason this simple exercise captures our imagination. It reminds us that the brain is not isolated from the rest of the body. Modern neuroscience increasingly describes the brain as part of a larger integrated system. Hormones released by glands influence thinking. Signals from the immune system influence mood. The gut communicates with the brain through nerves and chemical messengers. Even the rhythm of your heartbeat can affect attention and emotional processing. Once you begin to see these connections, the old picture of the brain sitting alone in darkness starts to disappear. Instead, you see an entire body participating in every thought you have. Every sensation, every movement, every breath contributes information. Consciousness isn't happening in isolation. It emerges from constant interaction. So if someone tells you that clenching your fists for 90 seconds completely changes your brain chemistry, be cautious. That claim goes far beyond the evidence. But if someone says that a deliberate physical action can influence attention, activate neural pathways, affect your mental state, and become one small part of regulating how you think and feel, that is much closer to what neuroscience actually suggests. The beauty lies not in believing exaggerated promises, but in appreciating the astonishing complexity of the system. The remarkable fact is not that one simple trick solves every problem. The remarkable fact is that your brain is so deeply connected with your body that even the smallest movement becomes part of an ongoing conversation, one that has been taking place every second of your life, whether you realized it or not. Now, if that idea is true, then another question naturally appears. Why would evolution build such a system in the first place? Why not create a brain that simply thinks independently, unaffected by the position of your hands or the rhythm of your breathing? The answer becomes surprisingly obvious when you remember what the brain was originally designed to do. Contrary to popular belief, the primary purpose of the brain is not to think about philosophy, solve mathematical equations, or write poetry. Those are wonderful abilities, but they arrived much later. The brain evolved first and foremost to keep a living organism alive. Survival came before intelligence. Before your ancestors could compose music or invent telescopes, they had to avoid predators, find food, recognize danger, and make decisions within fractions of a second. To accomplish that, the brain couldn't afford to ignore the body. In fact, ignoring the body would have been a fatal mistake. Imagine an early human walking through a forest. Suddenly, the muscles become tense. The heartbeat accelerates. The breathing becomes shallow. The skin grows slightly sweaty. None of these reactions are random. They are messages. Together, they tell the brain that something important may be happening before conscious awareness is fully caught up. Sometimes your body notices subtle changes in the environment before your conscious mind forms a complete explanation. That doesn't mean the body possesses magical powers. It means millions of years of evolution have produced a system in which information flows in every direction at once. The brain predicts what is happening, the body reacts, the reaction creates new information, and the brain immediately updates its prediction. It is an endless conversation rather than a chain of commands. This is one reason emotions often feel physical. People say they have butterflies in their stomach before speaking in public. They describe a heavy feeling in the chest after hearing terrible news. Fear makes the knees weak. Joy feels light. Anxiety creates tight shoulders. Grief seems almost painful. These expressions are not merely poetic. They reflect something very real. Emotional experiences are inseparable from bodily changes. If you removed every physical sensation associated with an emotion, would the emotion remain exactly the same? Neuroscientists continue debating that question, but nearly everyone agrees that the body contributes far more to emotional experience than we once imagined. Now think about what happens when you deliberately create one of those physical changes yourself. Suppose you're feeling nervous before giving a presentation. Your shoulders are tense. Your breathing is fast. Your fists are already slightly clenched without you realizing it. You consciously slow your breathing, relax your jaw, loosen your hands, and straighten your posture. You haven't erased the source of your nervousness. The audience is still there. The speech still needs to be delivered. But you have changed part of the information flowing into the brain. That changes the calculation the brain is constantly making about your internal state. The danger hasn't disappeared, but the alarm system may become less intense. This is why simple physical techniques are sometimes useful, not because they possess mysterious powers, but because they influence one part of a much larger biological network. Breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, stretching, meditation, walking, even splashing cold water on your face all affect signals traveling through the nervous system. None of them rewrite your personality overnight. None of them eliminate every psychological challenge. Yet they demonstrate an important principle. The brain is constantly updating itself based on incoming information, and your body provides a tremendous amount of that information every second. Let's make the puzzle even more interesting. Close your eyes for a moment and picture yourself biting into a fresh lemon. Imagine cutting it open. Notice the tiny drops of juice spraying into the air. Bring the slice close to your nose. You can almost smell it. Now imagine taking a large bite. Many people notice something extraordinary at this point. Their mouths begin producing saliva even though there's no lemon anywhere nearby. Think about what just happened. An imaginary fruit produced a measurable physical response. A thought changed the body. Earlier we saw the opposite, where the body influenced the mind. Together these examples reveal something profound. The communication goes both ways continuously. The border between mind and body is much blurrier than everyday language suggests. This brings us back once again to those 90 seconds of clenching your fists. People often expect dramatic transformations because dramatic stories spread faster than accurate ones. Social media rewards certainty. Headlines promise miracles. The reality is both less exciting and far more fascinating. Your nervous system is exquisitely sensitive. Tiny changes accumulate. Small adjustments influence attention. Attention influences perception. Perception influences decisions. Decisions shape habits. Habits gradually reshape the brain itself. That process is called neuroplasticity, and it represents one of the most remarkable discoveries in modern neuroscience. Your brain is not a statue carved from stone. It is more like a living forest. Every repeated experience strengthens certain pathways while allowing others to weaken. The brain is continually reorganizing itself according to how it is used. People sometimes misunderstand neuroplasticity as if it means you can become anything simply by wishing hard enough. Reality is more complicated. The brain changes, but it changes according to biological rules. Practice matters because repeated activity strengthens networks. Sleep matters because memories are stabilized during rest. Nutrition matters because neurons require energy and raw materials to function. Exercise matters because it increases blood flow and supports long-term brain health. Social interaction matters because humans evolved as intensely social creatures. In other words, there is no single secret that unlocks the brain. There are many small influences working together every day. This should actually make you optimistic. Imagine trying to steer an enormous ship across the ocean. If the only way to change direction were one gigantic movement of the steering wheel, navigation would be impossible. Instead, the captain makes countless tiny corrections. Each correction seems insignificant by itself, yet together they determine where the ship eventually arrives. Your brain works in much the same way. Tiny physical actions, repeated consistently, become part of a larger pattern. One healthy choice rarely changes your life. Thousands of healthy choices often do. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about the brain is the belief that we consciously control most of what it does. In reality, consciousness occupies only a small fraction of the brain's total activity. Long before you become aware of making a decision, networks of neurons have already begun processing information. Your eyes collect far more visual detail than you consciously notice. Your ears filter thousands of sounds without asking permission. Your muscles constantly adjust your balance without requiring deliberate thought. Even your heartbeat and digestion continue while your conscious mind is busy worrying about tomorrow's meeting or remembering something that happened years ago. Consciousness is incredibly powerful, but it is not the entire story. It sits atop an immense foundation of automatic processes operating every moment of your life. And that is exactly why seemingly simple actions deserve scientific attention. A clenched fist is never just a clenched fist. It is electrical activity flowing through motor neurons. It is sensory receptors firing in muscles and tendons. It is blood vessels adjusting to increased muscular demand. It is regions of the brain coordinating movement, monitoring effort, integrating sensation, and updating predictions about the body's condition. What appears simple on the outside becomes astonishingly complex once you look beneath the surface. That, perhaps more than anything else, is the lesson hidden inside an ordinary human hand.